Wonderful. Thanks, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I believe this is our most attended class so far, so word is getting out. I appreciate that. Tell your friends, tell everybody. Today, I'm pleased to introduce our principal trumpet, Jay Ellsmore. I won't share too much about him so that he can talk about himself just a little bit. He has been with the orchestra. This is now his second year, I believe, correct? With the orchestra. Yep. And we have welcomed him with open arms to the symphony. So I'm very excited to introduce him all to you today. He's got some really cool instruments and mutes to share with all of you and some wonderful excerpts. So I'm going to hand it off to Jay.
Okay. As Sammy said, this is just my second season with the Terre Haute Symphony. Had a blast the first season. I can't wait to do it for many years to come. I'm not originally from Indiana. I grew up in Iowa, went to grad school and got my undergrad at Lawrence University in Wisconsin, then went to Colorado, to the University of Northern Colorado for a couple years for grad school. And then I moved all the way down to Texas in the Dallas area for about 8 years. And I performed a bunch out there, taught a ton of lessons. And then just 5 years ago, my wife and I moved to Indianapolis because for both of us, Texas never felt like home. My wife grew up in Indiana. I grew up in Iowa, like I mentioned. So it's good to be back in the Midwest. And there's just a ton of performance opportunity here. Okay, so we're going to start with a very brief history of the trumpet here. I'm going to do a screen share. Just for about 7 minutes or so. Hopefully everybody can see this. All right, so here you see the standard trumpet. When you think of a trumpet in the United States especially, you think of this thing. This is the B-flat trumpet. But when we go back, really not that far into history, but before the 1500s, trumpets were commonly played on things like ram's horns. This is a ram's horn, as you can see there, with a mouthpiece simply bored out at the tip. They were used for various things, mainly signaling. If you needed something very loud, whether to signal the time of day or in battle, things like this were used. They're also made out of wood, sometimes with finger holes, functioning a little bit more like a woodwind instrument. But I mean, for centuries, really, trumpets were around, just not in anywhere near their current form. Now we're going to fast forward all the way to, we'll say 1600. You see 3 trumpets on your screen here, played by 3 different professionals. This is what's commonly referred to as the natural trumpet or the Baroque trumpet. The 2 on the left, you notice that they're just holding the instrument with one hand, and there are no valves, no finger holes, nothing. So everything must be played with the lips. So again, it's very different from the way we play trumpet in the 21st century and the 20th century as well. I do want to point out that Alison Balsam, one of the best trumpet players in the world today, she's on the right. She's playing a Baroque trumpet that has little air holes. She's using her right hand to play those. And what those do is, I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about the overtone series, but they help with the intonation problems associated with the natural trumpet, make them sound really, really good while maintaining the tone quality and the color of one of those instruments. Back from 1607 was when the trumpet was actually first used in a symphony orchestra. There's some wonderful videos out there on YouTube of Monteverdi's opera Orfeo. It opens with this really great trumpet fanfare, and they're playing these instruments. So I recommend you check that out. And these instruments were really used through Beethoven's time, really. This is what we had. We played a lot of pretty boring parts, to be honest, playing with the timpani a lot. The note choice was pretty limited, yet great music nonetheless. Let's fast forward to the year 1800. So if you notice here, we have a trumpet. It's the similar length as what we saw on the previous screen, but we've got keys on this thing. They're not valves like we have on a modern trumpet. These are keys that function a little bit more like a woodwind instrument. This was specifically built for the Haydn concerto to be performed. If you're familiar with trumpet concertos, there really aren't that many, to be honest. But one of the first one that comes to mind is the Haydn concerto. This was the instrument. This is a modern copy of that instrument. Another concerto that comes to mind that was played on this specific instrument is the Hummel concerto. Okay, and it sounded a little bit like a flugelhorn, or so I've read, a little bit more mellow than our modern trumpet. Let's fast forward just a few more years. This is a modern rotary trumpet. This is the first time that the trumpet had valves. And what a valve does is when you push down a valve, it bypasses the main tubing and it adds length to the instrument. When you have 3 valves, that allows the trumpet to play chromatically. So that just opened all kinds of doors. Hey, we can play melodies now in the entire register of the instrument, not just playing really high, not just boring arpeggios. And it really made the instrument a lot easier to play, especially for those players who had trouble with the upper register. And you may notice, if you've seen a French horn before, those valves are pretty much exactly the way a French horn functions, those rotary valves. Let's fast forward just a few more years to 1839. This is when the piston valve was patented. This is what most American orchestral players play on, piston instruments. They do the same thing. They extend the length of the instrument, depending on which valve combination you put down. But just a different way of playing the instrument, getting the same job done. Now, as of 1930, the trumpet has really not changed hardly at all. And here I have 4 different pictures of trumpets that a modern orchestral trumpet player will use. I don't know if you can see my cursor here. On the upper left, we have the B-flat trumpet that we saw earlier. If you're a jazz player, this is probably what you're going to use almost exclusively. In the lower left here, we have the C trumpet. This is an American orchestral trumpet player's best friend. This is what we use for about 90% of our repertoire. Unless you're playing a lot of pops concerts, then you're going to play the B-flat trumpet a little bit more. And on the upper right, this is an E-flat trumpet. The Haydn concerto I mentioned earlier works really well on this thing. Way better than the keyed trumpet we saw earlier. And then here again we have the rotary trumpet. You see more and more actually in American orchestras today, the rotary trumpet is used to play the music of Beethoven, pretty much anything German. Music of Wagner, especially Schumann, Brahms. It just has a slightly different timbre that works really well in an orchestra. In German orchestras, actually, they use these rotary trumpets almost exclusively rather than the pistons. But to be honest, if you listen to a recording, it's, even for me, it's hard to tell the difference. So, okay, I'll use this slide again a little bit later. So now I'm going to talk about how the instrument actually works, the mechanics of the thing. Now, if you were here for the trombone class, you know that a trumpet or a trombone or any brass instrument is made of metal, made of brass. Okay, the B-flat trumpet here is about 4 foot 10 inches of tubing. Okay, some instruments don't have any shiny finish on the outside at all. It doesn't change the way it plays. This one has a silver plating, which is nice and durable, and it's pretty. You may be wondering how long a trumpet would be if it's not all curved like this. I just happen to have a B-flat trumpet that doesn't have any curves at all. I'll actually stand back here so you can see the entire length of the instrument. Okay, I actually played this at the horse track quite a bit. This is called a coach horn, just a fancy name for a straight bugle. Really easy to make, really, just a straight trumpet. Now, to play a trumpet, we also need a mouthpiece. It's very much like a trombone mouthpiece. The main difference is that it's smaller, has a cup shape inside. I don't know if you can see that too well. What makes this different from a French horn mouthpiece is that it's got that cup shape rather than a V shape. A French horn mouthpiece is much deeper, which helps in giving it a more mellow tone. So we got the instrument, we have the mouthpiece, we have the tubing itself. How do we make a sound on this thing? Well, the first ingredient is air. This is a wind instrument, a brass wind instrument. So when we blow the air, we got to use our flesh reed. Instead of using a wooden reed like a woodwind instrument, we buzz our lips. Beautiful sound, I know. You do that through the mouthpiece, we get what sounds, I think, a lot like a mosquito. So there you have it. The air, the embouchure, the buzzing of the lips. That's how you make a sound on the trumpet. I'm now going to go back to the previous screen that we saw and talk a little bit about the overtone series. If you're not familiar with the overtone series is, it's how a brass instrument changes notes without moving any valves, okay? You notice I have two sets of notes here. First, I'm going to talk about the set of notes on the bottom of your screen, okay? The natural trumpet or the Baroque trumpet that I talked about earlier has all these notes at its disposal. So I'm going to play a makeshift Baroque trumpet. This is just a student model cheap trumpet that was transformed into a Baroque trumpet, but it's still going to accomplish the same thing as far as presentation goes. And if you follow the notes, if you read music at all on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see that I'm able to play without moving any valves or anything, all the notes on that screen, at least most of them. Let's see how high I can play this morning. So imagine having to do that for each change of notes. You got to change the speed of your air. Okay. One cool thing about the natural trumpet or Baroque trumpet is trumpets in the day had a box full of different slides that they could attach when the music would change keys. So if you change your slide, you get a whole different set of notes that's in a different key. Okay. Earlier I mentioned the air holes. This one is equipped with air holes. You may have noticed there was a note that I played in that series that was very out of tune. Let me play it again for you. It's the note that has the number 4 underneath it. Cover up all the air holes here. That one right there, it's in between two notes. It's in between an F and an F sharp. Well, with these air holes, you can open up one of those holes and it's going to be much better in tune. Even better if you have a real instrument to play on. Okay, now it sounds like an F. So when you hear people like Alison Balsam on her Sound the Trumpet album, or Nicholas Eklund, they're using those air holes to make it play beautifully in tune. Okay. I'm going to say a few more things about the mechanics of the instrument. I've covered how to make a sound on the instrument, how we change notes. If I can find my mouthpiece here. On a much shorter trumpet, we have the same overtone series. Bugle calls use that same overtone series, by the way. Now you may have noticed each note on the trumpet starts with a nice ping. It almost sounds like a bell. What we do to start a note is we start the note with the tongue. Tu, it's like saying tu or t, and that gives it that nice ping. When we think of trumpet, we think of that nice bell-like sound, at least I do. Now, if we change notes with the valves, if I choose not to tongue the notes, it sounds really, really smooth. Okay, this is how we slur on the trumpet. If you remember from the trombone presentation, you got to tongue every single note on the trombone for the most part. To play a slur, you just have to tongue really, really gently. Well, on a trumpet, we have the option of slurring that way by not using the tongue at all. So that gives us more options as far as changing the way the trumpet sounds, playing more smooth and connected. Okay. Speaking of valves, I do want to point out that I want to demonstrate how the valves actually work and why they allow us to play a full chromatic scale. We now know what the overtone series is. With the valves, we now have 7 trumpets in one. With these valves, I can use 7 different combinations to give me 7 different tube lengths. With those different tube lengths, I can play all the notes I want. So I'm going to play 3 or 4 notes from that overtone series, but I'm going to put down a different valve combination for each one.
Wow.
Right, so I can't tell you how many times at the horse track when I'm playing a fanfare that doesn't use any valves, they say, "You're not really playing that, are you? That's just a recording. You're not pushing any buttons." Well, you got to understand how the trumpet works. So I talked about ways to change the smoothness and how connected the notes sound by slurring. Another way we can change the way the trumpet sounds, we can play louder. As you'd imagine, we increase the volume of air to make the instrument louder. If you really know what you're doing, you can get the sound down to a whisper, which really comes in handy in an orchestra, especially when it's a really light texture and you don't want to cover up the rest of the instruments. Okay. Conductors love to tell the trumpets that they're playing too loud, so it's a good skill to have. Okay, now to play higher, the air speed doesn't need to increase in volume, but in speed. I think of the air as getting smaller or colder and faster. I'll do it on the mouthpiece. The tongue also gets higher in my mouth, like I'm doing a whistle. And for lower notes, warmer air or bigger air and slower. Okay. What do we do if we want to get a different kind of color of sound on the trumpet? What if I need to be a little bit more mellow? Well, there's things I can do with this thing. I can warm the airstream, open the throat a little bit. That'll make a subtle difference in tone. I'm not sure how much you can hear that on Zoom, but I'll try. Now I'll play it a little bit brighter, like it's more of a jazz solo. Okay. You can change the actual instrument itself. There are trumpets that are lighter in weight and have a slightly skinnier bore size that help brighten the sound a little bit. You can change your mouthpiece. I actually have quite a few mouthpieces that I have. If I want to change the color of the sound a little bit. Or we have mutes. You can see all these mutes back here. They are great devices to change the sound of the instrument. I'll just play a few of them for you. The most common kind of mute is a straight mute, the metal straight mute. Okay. We have the cup mute. This goes in the end of the bell. We have the Harmon mute. First, I'll play it with this stem in the bottom. This is what I do for a lot of kid presentations. They recognize this sound. And this was used by Miles Davis quite a bit, the Harmon mute without a stem. Also have a plunger mute back there that I use with jazz a lot, bucket mute. I have used each and every one of those mutes up there at some point, so they really come in handy. Okay, so now we've talked about how to play the instrument, how to change the sound. I'm going to play a bunch of excerpts that are required of the professional trumpet player in a symphony orchestra. I have 11 for you if we have time for all of those. I'm going to start with the music of Mussorgsky. I honestly can't think of a single audition where I didn't have to play this. This is the Promenade from Pictures at an Exhibition, orchestrated by Maurice Ravel. In this piece, you're supposed to portray somebody walking from one painting to the next before the next painting or musical picture begins in the orchestral work. So the Promenade from Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition. Next, we move on to the music of Gustav Mahler. If you're familiar with his Fifth Symphony, the first movement of this piece can almost be called a concerto for trumpet. It is loaded with solos by the principal trumpet. The opening of the piece, just like the Promenade I just played, is the trumpet completely by itself. And what makes this excerpt especially difficult is you have to show so many things that are pretty difficult on the trumpet. You have to play really soft, you have to play really loud, you have to play from low to high pretty quick, you have to play from high to low. And the hardest thing probably is you have to portray a funeral march, something that is a very, very sad event, of course. I'll just play it. The opening to Mahler's Fifth Symphony. Also from the first movement, much more lyrical solo. Some people say this is about thinking of the bittersweet memories of loved ones lost. Another thing I want to mention about being an orchestral trumpet player is we have to transpose. Now, what that means is if I see a G in the music staff, a lot of times I'm not playing a G on my instrument. I have to transpose down a whole step, up a whole step, up a minor third, up a major third, down a perfect fourth, up a tritone, pretty much any transposition you can think of. And the reason for that is actually quite simple. If you remember at the beginning of the presentation, all the different instruments that had been invented through the years, especially the Baroque trumpet with all those different slides. Music for the trumpet in the orchestra could say trumpet in B flat, trumpet in C, trumpet in D, trumpet in E flat. Okay? So instead of switching trumpets for every piece, most players play everything on C or B flat trumpet, and we got to adjust our valves accordingly. For example, the two Mahler excerpts I played in, the first one was in B flat. I'm playing a C trumpet, so I was playing it from memory, but when I first worked on it, I had to take everything down a whole step. For the second excerpt, it's trumpet in F. That means everything was up a perfect fourth. Okay, so very common. I'd say about half the excerpts I'm playing today need to be transposed. I'll do a little bit more playing for you. Let's move on to the music of Igor Stravinsky. If you're familiar with Petrushka, you'll know that there's a lot of trumpet music in this work. On pretty much every trumpet audition, I'd say 75, 80% of them, you have to play the ballerina dance from Petrushka. It seems simple enough. It's kind of a fanfare with some scale-like passages in it, but you have to play the whole thing in one breath pretty much, unless you can take some really quick breaths through your nose. And you don't want to sound like a big fanfare trumpet. You're playing the role of a ballerina, so it's got to stay delicate. So the ballerina dance from Stravinsky's Petrushka. That excerpt was in B flat. I had to take everything down a step, in case you're wondering. Next, we move to Johann Sebastian Bach. I'm going to do a switch of instruments here. No, I will not be playing Bach on a Baroque trumpet. That is not an instrument I play. This is a piccolo trumpet. It is half the length as your standard B flat trumpet. Okay, so why in the world would we take away length when the original instrument was played with 8 feet of tubing? Well, you could call it cheating, but once you hear this thing, you're going to love the sound of it. It really does sing out well. And piccolo trumpets usually come in 2 keys, B flat and A. I've got it set up for the key of A. That's why this is pulled out so far. And what that does when the music is in the key of D, which a lot of Baroque music is, instead of a B flat trumpet, which would mean 4 sharps, which gives us a lot of third valves, it's a little bit awkward, it puts me in the key of F, which looks like this. It's mostly this. All right, so this is from Johann Sebastian Bach's Christmas Oratorio. If you've been to a performance of Handel Messiah, the trumpet shell sound is commonly played on that instrument as well. All right, so let's move to the music of Respighi, Pines of Rome. There's some really tough music on this piece. I would say more so on more serious auditions would you have to play some of the really difficult repertoire. However, there is the offstage solo, Ascending from a Catacomb, that is asked on, I'd say, most auditions. It's an offstage solo, and it's a very lyrical, chant-like solo. Offstage solo from Pines of Rome by Respighi. Now I'd like to move on to the music of Rimsky-Korsakov. One of the things that all brass instrumentalists need to do is double and triple tongue, at least as far as symphony orchestra playing. Scheherazade has it all. It's got double tonguing, it's got triple tonguing. You got to do it really, really fast. And in one excerpt in particular, you have to do a little bit of both. It's kind of an awkward tonguing pattern. So you can see why this is asked upon in a lot of auditions, because they want to make sure you can do just that. So first I'll start with a more traditional trumpet solo. No double tonguing, no triple tonguing, that sweeps over the orchestra. And then I'll get into the multiple tonguing. Okay, the music of Rimsky-Korsakov, Scheherazade. Now to the fourth movement. Right, so some of you may be wondering, how does one actually double and triple tongue? And it's actually quite simple. Instead of just saying two, 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 two for everything, you add the ku syllable, like you're saying key. So to double tongue, you say two, q, two, q, two, q, two, q, two. And to triple tongue, you got to have two t's and a k. Pick your combination. I prefer two, two, q, two, two, q, two. this is actually something people do in regular speech every day. One thing that comes to mind, I was listening to a radio station once, and somebody said out of nowhere, "And a good afternoon to everybody." And she said it really fast. "And a good afternoon to everybody." Well, that's essentially triple tonguing. So again, it's something we do. It's just something you got to learn to do while forming an embouchure, playing a brass instrument. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to some George Gershwin. A fan favorite is American in Paris, and this excerpt is the I Miss Home excerpt. I'm in Paris, I want to go back home to the States. And this is asked at a lot of auditions because they want to make sure you can play in a jazz style. The music of George Gershwin. I'll be playing this one on B-flat trumpet. Many times that excerpt is played with a felt mute. It's simply a piece of fabric over your bell that gives it a slightly more delicate sound, warmer sound. Okay, I'd like to move to Shostakovich now, another 20th century composer. He wrote a few piano concertos, as you may know. His first concerto was actually called Concerto for Piano, Trumpet, and Strings, because the trumpet player, there's just one, has a very prominent role. Okay, they also do a lot of sitting around, but when they do play, it's a big part. Now, this solo specifically is, the reason this is on a lot of auditions is because you have to show your ability to play really, really soft, go to the bottom of the range of the instrument. Okay, I can't play this on C trumpet. The C trumpet doesn't go low enough. So I got to play it on B flat trumpet. And it also, it shows your ability to go from low to high. As you hear at the end, it goes from the way low register of the instrument to almost the top of the orchestral trumpet's range. You'll see a lot of trumpet players use a cup mute for this excerpt. I prefer to use a plastic straight mute, and I have a bunch of foam that I put in here to help soften the sound. Okay. Shostakovich. I have time for a few more. On to the music of Bartók. Now, if you haven't heard Bartók's Concerto for Orchestra, you need to check that out because it's a great showpiece for the orchestra, and it's got a lot of great trumpet stuff in it. It's got opportunity for all of the trumpets to be playing in canon, where each part is just as important as the other. And it's got great solo opportunity as well. And I picked this because on a lot of second and third trumpet auditions, they ask you to play the second trumpet solo, yes, the second trumpet solo from the final movement. Okay, it's not that often where a second trumpet gets their moment to shine, but for that reason, this is asked on a lot of auditions. Bartók Concerto for Orchestra, second trumpet solo. Now I'm going to attempt to play some of the first trumpet part on the next page. You're going to hear when I play it, it's really obvious why this is asked on a lot of principal trumpet auditions, because you got to play loud, you kind of play really high, and it doesn't really stop. So here is the first trumpet excerpt from the finale of Bartók Concerto for Orchestra. And I've got one more excerpt for all of you. If you're familiar with Tchaikovsky Nutcracker, I mean, who isn't, right? From the Spanish dance movement, the chocolate movement, there is a very exposed trumpet solo right at the beginning of it. Now, a lot of people choose to play this solo on B-flat trumpet. A lot of people play it on C trumpet, works pretty darn well. I like to play it on E-flat trumpet. It just kind of fits in really nice. And I also wanted to show up close and personal what an E-flat trumpet looks like. You can notice the tubing is a lot shorter. It doesn't wrap all the way around here like it does on the other instruments.
The bell is longer, right?
Yeah, it looks longer. It's actually not. I'll actually put it next to the B-flat trumpet. I'm glad you asked that.
It just looks longer.
Yeah, it looks longer. They do make E-flat trumpets where it's looks like a B-flat trumpet, but it's all down to scaled down a little bit. I kind of like the long bell models as well. And what this one does is you can screw off the bell. It screws off. All the slides come out, and I can switch it out so it becomes a D trumpet. So I don't have to buy two entire trumpets, just 1.5 trumpets. Okay, that's it for the excerpts I'm going to play. I do have a little bit of a solo. I'll be playing on B-flat trumpet. Sometimes at auditions, they require you to play something like the Haydn Concerto or the Hummel Concerto, an excerpt from the first movement. Sometimes, though, they let you play whatever you want. So what I do is I choose something that I feel shows my strengths and also shows some lyrical playing, some technical playing, some showy playing. So I chose the music of Jules Levy. This is called Grand Russian Fantasy. Now I'll be putting all sorts of cuts in this because I'm only going to play for a few minutes, but you'll get the idea of why I like to choose this solo. And on to some of the variation. All right. That's all the playing I'm going to do for you today. I'm going to open that up for questions.
Great job, Jay. We've got just a couple questions in the chat. So if anyone has a question, why don't you just type it in the chat and then I'll read them off to Jay. That way we don't have everybody talking all at once. So the first question comes from Sherry Daly. She's a board member, by the way, Jay, and has been for several years. She asks, how do you make the sound wavy?
Oh, play with vibrato like a singer.
Yes. Now we can talk about vibrato a little bit.
Yeah, there's actually multiple ways to do this. The way I do it is I call it jaw vibrato. I use kind of a chewing motion. You can see my jaw.
You actually move your jaw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other ways trumpet players do it is that it's called hand vibrato. They actually move the horn. I can't do it very well because it's not the way I use, but they can do it that way. And some people use the air as well. I think that's the way flutes do it, but
yeah, and oboists too. Yeah, oboists and flutes use air, so they actually use their diaphragm to create the vibrato. But as a clarinetist, if I have to play any jazz, I use my embouchure. That's the easiest way to do it. All right, next question comes from Betsy Frank. She's a longtime supporter of the symphony. And she asked, how many trumpets do you own? And then how much does a trumpet cost?
I don't know how many trumpets I own. In here right now, I've also got a flugelhorn. I've got 7 here, probably 8 or 9. The ones I use the most, I probably use 4 or 5 of them. Trumpets, as far as cost, this is changing a little bit, but they're one of the cheapest instruments compared to the others. So I know that bassoons, Sandy, maybe you know this better than I do, they're at least $10,000.
Oh, probably.
Probably more.
Nicer ones are 30 or 40,000. Yeah.
You can get a professional quality trumpet. I mean, ones that world-class trumpet players actually use, brand new for $2,500, $3,000. I mean, that's not cheap, but compared to other instruments, it is relatively low.
Compared to clarinets, that's pretty cheap.
Yeah, I got this one from my brother-in-law. It was sitting in his closet for 10 years, and he just gave it to me. It's a 1985 Bach Stradivarius, and it played better than my other horn, so I lucked out there. There are trumpets that run $10,000 to $20,000, but I honestly don't think they sound as good. But that's just me. Some people love them, the Monette brand. But yeah, I'd say $3,000 to $5,000 for some of the newest, latest, and greatest.
I'm very jealous. That's very good to know. All right, next question. Sherry asks, when Al Hirsch was in a Mardi Gras parade, he was hit by something that split his lip. His armature, they said. Experts were afraid that he would never play again. Can you explain that?
Well, in our face, we have lots of little muscles. And right here, we got this mouthpiece that presses up against this. Your lip is between a rock and a hard place. We all have nightmares about somebody hitting the bell when we play. I mean, it really does hurt.
Yeah.
In the muscle right here, especially the top lip, the bottom lip doesn't take, it's a lot stronger, a lot more durable, at least for me. Your muscle can actually split right here a little bit. And sometimes that just has a lot of trouble healing. I've known people that have actually had surgery right here to get things working a little bit better.
Wow. What do you do preventative wise to keep your embouchure healthy and your lips healthy?
Well, if you're really playing the right way and using good habits, which is a lot easier when I'm not playing alone every day because of COVID, you got to make sure you're using the right muscles all of the time. And when I say the right muscles, I mean these muscles need to be really, really firm and really strong. The pressure on the face should actually be very, very little. Sometimes I warm up lying down, so I'm actually pushing the horn away from me instead of bringing it toward me. So if you do it right, you can play for hours and you're not going to suffer any damage. You may not sound as good, but we're human. We all kind of fall into that using too much pressure thing, and you can damage your lip that way. So yeah, I play a lot of lyrical, easy flow studies, stuff that doesn't make me work too hard, things that get me relaxing. So those are the kind of things I do.
Okay. Another question. Do you play any other instruments?
Kind of. I started on piano in second grade. I played that through high school. I don't really practice piano much anymore, but it does come in handy. But I don't play any other instruments really well. No, I can play French horn. Yeah, I can play French horn. I've performed on it at a band camp when they didn't want to hire anybody else. So kind of is the answer. I don't play any other instruments well.
Okay, all right. All right, so Sherry has another question. Some trumpeters seem to hold their cheeks in. Others, like Dizzy Gillespie, had cheeks that looked like balloons.
Oh,
is
yeah.
there a difference or a reason?
I don't honestly know how Dizzy Gillespie was able to play so well and puff his cheeks out like that. I can think of two famous trumpet players. There must be more, but I can think of just two that puff their cheeks out like that. I think not Freddie Hubbard. I can think of another jazz player who did that, but by and large, you're going to see trumpet players with their cheeks nice and firm. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for clarinetists, puffy cheeks is a big no-no. Absolutely none. Okay, 2 questions from Whitney. What made you choose the trumpet as an instrument, and what do you enjoy most about playing and performing?
The choice for trumpet was an easy one for me. My dad was a trumpet player, so we had an Olds was the brand, trumpet lying around that he didn't care if I beat on it or whatever. And I was able to produce a sound from an early age. I didn't know it at the time, but because the way my teeth are, they're really good for trumpet playing. They kind of form a typical V like this. I don't know, you can see that. If you see pictures of Allison Ball, some other famous trumpet players, they got the same thing. So it came pretty easy, and I had a trumpet in the house. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me. It was between that and trombone, and I ended up choosing trumpet. And I enjoy playing trumpet. It's a great instrument. I mean, you can really carry over the top of an entire group when necessary, which is kind of a nice trick to have. It's versatile. I can play in a lot of jazz groups. Yeah, and like I said earlier, I do play piano, but I just didn't excel in it like I did on trumpet. Never played any strings. It just was always the instrument that came the easiest to me.
Yeah. Betsy would like to know, have you ever been in marching band?
I was in high school.
Okay.
Yeah,
You didn't do drum corps or anything?
No, I never did drum corps. When I was actually selecting which colleges to go to, I was looking for a place that did not have a marching band because I just didn't enjoy it a whole lot. I didn't want to be tempted into doing that. I really, really love watching corps performances, love watching the marching band. It's just not something I enjoyed doing personally, but I did do it in high school.
Marching band is huge in Indiana in high school. I was part of it, and the drum corps, DCI, they do their finals here in Indianapolis, and big deal here in Indiana. Sherry asks, I've heard that the French horn is the most difficult instrument. Do you agree? Was it harder than the trumpet?
Well, for me, certainly when I try to play French horn, it sounds god-awful. But the reason that people say that is because we talked about this is a good question. We talked about the overtone series. The longer the instrument, the more notes you have without pushing any valves. With French horn, because it's, I may be wrong on this, I think 18 feet long. It's much, much longer than a trumpet. It's much easier to play the wrong note when you're just this close to playing the right one, okay? Trumpet players tend to miss a lot more notes in the upper register, as do French horn players, but I don't know if it's actually harder or not. I actually hear trumpet players miss more notes, maybe because it's a louder instrument. But, but yeah, when they say it's the hardest, I believe that's really what they're referring to. It's easier to play on the wrong partial in that overtone series.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, that makes sense. All right, any other questions? We got 2 more minutes. If you'd like to take your mic off, that's fine. Unmute yourself.
As usual, I do have another one. It's Sherry. I Basically, there were a lot of changes in the trumpet during its long history until about the last 90 years, right?
Yep.
So if you could make a change in the trumpet and you could be the next inventor of something special for the trumpet, what would it be? Or do you love it just the way it is?
That's a tough one, huh? I don't know if I would make a change since they're coming up with so many wonderful instruments. What I would do is I would try to promote I would try to encourage music programs to have more involvement in the natural and Baroque trumpet playing. Just expand upon that, because when you do actually hear an ensemble, the intonation of those natural trumpets is just superior for reasons I don't really need to get into right now, but it just has a blend and an intonation that works really, really well. I guess maybe I would want to invent an instrument that creates those same kind of tone colors, but at the same time uses valves. Okay. Haven't thought about that a whole lot, but.
The best of both worlds then.
Yes, absolutely.
How many, when it isn't COVID, how many live orchestras do you play in?
I am actually official member of 3 symphony orchestras right now. I'm also a member of the Columbus, Indiana Philharmonic and the Lafayette Symphony. I also pretty regularly play with the Danville Symphony. I don't know if they have permanent members in the wind section, because whenever I'm there, it's always people that they've called. But I would say 4 orchestras I play with regularly.
Anyone else?
I saved the most shallow question for last. It seems like there are boy instruments and girl instruments. The boys play trumpets, the girls play flutes, right? Am I wrong? I mean, you just said that one of the finest contemporary trumpeters is a woman, so obviously it's a pretty shallow observation. But it is the case.
The tradition, but there's no reason whatsoever why girls and women shouldn't be trumpet players. Whenever I see I'll give you a personal example. When I made all-state orchestra in high school, I was a sophomore. I was really excited. It was my first year playing in all-state orchestra. There were 6 trumpets. I was the only guy.
Ah, well.
And they all, I mean, that was proof to me right there that the lung capacity, there's no trouble whatsoever with that. So.
There are some pretty famous female trumpet players, aside from the one that you mentioned. There's a
Tina Helseth is another one.
Yeah, I can never pronounce her name correctly. But her last name is like Ting, T-H-I-N-G or something.
Yes, first mate.
Yeah.
Full name is T-H-I-N-G. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah. She's phenomenal. Yeah, one of my very best friends, she's a female trumpet player. She's in the top Air Force band in Washington, D.C. right now as a trumpet player.
Well, and so you've just dismissed all of my cliched thinking, and I'm going to dismiss it even further because one of my favorite jazz musicians is Claude Rampal, who plays the flute. So,
yeah.
So we're not going to let me be shallow anymore, okay?
I will say, though, that over the past, 20, 25 years, I feel that divide between male instruments and female instruments has blended, has definitely started to dissolve. There's a lot of female brass players and there's a lot of male woodwind players. In college, there's more male clarinetists than female clarinetists, but usually in high school or elementary school, all the girls play clarinet. So it's very interesting.
And Sammy, I just want to ask, you said over the past 25 years, and you're how old?
32.
So
but I picked up
from your long experience.
Well, but from when I started in elementary school band all the way until now, just seeing the development of how elementary schools have, the disbursement of male, female across the different instruments.
Not to mention cheerleading, right? So
Oh,
I think across the board, things are
Sure.
changing.
Yep.
I often say when I make an observation over the years, I describe the lofty pinnacle of my years. You don't exactly have a lofty pinnacle, my dear, but maybe, who knows? Thank you very much.
Before everyone disappears, I just want to say thank you to Jay. I want to say thank you to Samantha for setting all of this up. I want to let everybody know that what's coming up in November, I talked to Samantha, so the cello is what's going to be our instrument spotlight for November the 10th, so get registered for that. And then the violin will be the November 17th. And right now we are talking about maybe trying to do another one in December. So we are planning to continue the symphony tour all the way into next year and continuing into the winter. So please continue to join us and let everyone else know so that we can continue to kind of help try and support the symphony as much as we can. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you again, Jay and Samantha, for doing this for us. We appreciate it.